Okay, so listen, I told you guys that I would tell you about all the gas stuff that I go through. And today's no different. I'm grilling, so I want to kind of address this. Is there hair on this lens? Yeah, I want to address this real fast. So let's talk about my gas. I've been gassing lately for stuff I've had before. A Leica M, a X100V, a Leica SL2S. No rhyme or reason. And it's because of the conundrum that Micro Four Thirds is. So this video is, does Micro Four Thirds make sense? And if it does, in what way? So let me go through a couple things. You guys will see my kit in the process. This is kind of a way of like doing my kit and talking to you guys, but where I think Micro Four Thirds makes sense, and then things that don't make sense and like gives me gas. So let me start with the very first one, and it's this. You see this? In this backpack, which half of it is for like storage, the other half is camera gear, I have all of my Micro Four Thirds gear. All of it. And it's a pretty hefty amount. And so in that respect, it's amazing I can take this backpack and have everything that I need. I'm missing my EM1 Mark III. It's still up for repair. It'll be back to like February 16th or 14th, whatever it is. But yeah, nonetheless, I have most of my gear in here. So let's go through each lens. You talk about, does it make sense or not? Let me put this down here. Open this up. We'll go from widest to longest, if I do this properly. So first up is this right here. This is the 12mm f2 lens. I originally bought this to put for vlogging, and I didn't want a big lens for vlogging. 12mm f2, not bad. And I put this in EM1 Mark III. The reality is f2 is f4 in full frame. I don't know, can you get an f4 24mm lens for the same size weight, just about? I think it exists. I think Sony makes it, like a 2.5 aperture, or maybe it's 2.8. It's not much bigger than this. So does this lens make sense for vlogging? Giving up the sensor size? I don't know. This causes gas sometimes. Now the alternative is a 12mm 1.4 Leica lens, beautiful lens, but it's big because it's 1.4. And that's only 2.8 depth of field. If you want the blurry background, you can get 24mm f2.8 for smaller than the Leica lens. This causes gas. All right, let's go to the next one. Here's where Micro Four Thirds does make sense. Right here, this guy. 30mm f3.5 macro. Cheap, tiny, awesome, sharp, effective. I use it for film scanning. Yeah, Micro Four Thirds makes sense to this. I don't regret this purchase, not one tiny bit. Next lens, another spot where Micro Four Thirds makes a lot of sense, even though it's probably not the best IQ. This thing, the 40 to 150 f4 to 5.6R, $100 lens, ED, MSC, cheap. Plastic mount, that sucks. It's a kit lens in most places, but it makes perfect sense. This is cheap, it's lightweight, it's got good reach, up to 300mm equivalent in full frame. You're not gonna blow anybody's socks off with like depth of field, but this makes total sense. Total sense. But let's get into where gas starts to kick in. It's the lenses I use the most. It's this guy right here. I think it's a gorgeous lens. This is the 25mm f1.2. Now, I bought this because 50mm is my favorite focal length. It's kind of like the do everything focal length, and it just works well. But the reality is 1.2 on this lens is like 2.4 in a full frame lens. And so again, if depth of field is your thing, this is bigger, heavier, and more expensive. Now, where Zuiko does really well with Olympus, the lenses, is that these lenses are really sharp and they have really good rendering. I like the bokeh, all those things. But this is big, it's heavy, and it's only a 2.4 depth of field. And this isn't all about depth of field, by the way. And photography is so much more than that, I know. So don't kill me in the comment section. But like you look at a 51.8 that's for Nikon or Canon or Sony, it's 1/6 the price or 1/5 the price. It's lighter, it's smaller. Is it as sharp? I don't know, maybe not. I mean, this is a weather seal professional lens. It has the lens function button on it right there. But this lens gives me gas. If you're gonna be a Micro Four Thirds shooter, I think it's a good option to have, but you can do it just as good or almost as good for a lot cheaper and smaller and lighter on Micro Four Thirds. Let me flip the sausage. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm back. Here's a lens where I think People are gonna kill me on this one. Micro Four Thirds, it doesn't make sense, even though it's an awesome lens. It's this lens right here. Let me explain in a second. This right here is the 12 to 100. The equivalent focal length is 24 to 200. Full frame has this lens in a lot of ways. Now this lens, a Micro Four Thirds in particular, is superb. It's sharp, it's stabilized, it's amazing for what it is. It's an f4 lens. But the reality is you're getting a 24 to 200 equivalent at f8 depth of field on a full frame sensor. Now I don't care about that so much. It's more about the sharpness and the image and the composition, but the reality is you can get this type of lens from Nikon, from Canon, from Sony for less money with a shallower depth of field, similar light gathering, and it's not that much bigger, and you got a full frame sensor. This lens, and this is expensive by the way, this is a $1,000 lens. The 24-200 on full frame, I don't know, I mean, I have to look at the prices, but they're probably the same price or less. This causes me gas. This lens causes me gas. I don't know if that makes sense. Now, I'll tell you that that 12 to 100 with the IS has sync IS to my EM1 Mark III. It's a pretty baller combo and keeping things stabilized. All right, hold on. Now, this lens, I think is where Micro Four Thirds makes a lot of sense. I think this is why it explains the strategy of why Olympus is focusing on wildlife and bird photography going forward. They know they're not going to compete with the Nikon, the Canon, the Sonys in terms of like the do-all everything. They're going to niche themselves out. I think it's smart. It's like Leica's a niche. I think Pentax is going a niche with the DSLR type stuff. It's this lens right here. This is the 100 to 400. Where does it say it on the thing? Does it say it on here? Somewhere. I don't know. Probably behind this lens head. Yeah, it's right here. Look at this. This is the 100 to 400 f5 to 6.3. Now, there's a 150 to 400, which is super expensive, has a 1-year wait list. It's like $7 grand. This I bought for $1,200. There's also a 75 to 300, which is inferior. I think this is a good middle ground. This lens in particular has IS in it, and so does the camera, but they don't sync IS. But the interesting thing where this makes sense is that this is actually a 200 to 800 millimeter reach, and so you get significant weight savings on Micro Four Thirds with this. Now, that being said, I don't know how much you'd walk around and care about weight. I mean, that's big already. The other lenses are significantly bigger, but if you're gonna dedicate yourself to carrying the weight, is it just better to carry a full frame camera? And here's the big caveat. You consider stuff like the Fuji X-T4. They're 70 to 300. That's a good lens. They have a 100 to 400. Not the same reach, but that's also a stabilized sensor, stabilized lens. They have like a sync IS equivalent. It's interesting. I think this is really good for a birding wildlife type of setup, especially with the weather sealing and stuff that Olympus gives you, but it's not the only game in town. It's not the only game in town. And let me bring you to this last piece here. Now this is the 17 millimeter f1.8, and this is the EM10 Mark II. And if I'm being honest with you guys, as I'm committing myself to Micro Four Thirds to the rest of this year, I have gas to buy a Leica M camera. I have gas to buy a cheap full frame camera. I have gas to buy a Leica full frame camera with like one lens, one good lens or two good lenses, and then that's it. It's difficult to think about Micro Four Thirds as a whole. And I've been drinking some wine, so if this is rambling, I'm sorry, but this is where Micro Four Thirds makes sense. I think when you pair this type of camera, a cheap, capable camera, or even if you do the EM5 Mark III, which is more expensive but more capable than this EM10 Mark II, and you pair them with like the 17-1.8, the 45-1.8, the 25-1.8, the 12f2, because you can literally put all those lenses in a little bag, and it's significantly lightweight, it's small, it's capable, it's stabilized, it's got good autofocus, it's weather sealed. That's where I think Micro Four Thirds makes a lot of sense. When you try to make Micro Four Thirds do full frame things, which is depth of field equivalence, is where you start to kind of get gas. I get gas. You start being like, does this make a lot of sense? You start wondering. Don't forget also that I record videos on a ZV-1. So like for me, this is my vlogging camera. I don't need, you know, something super small or whatever it is at Micro Four Thirds to vlog because I'm using the ZV-1. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Micro Four Thirds, like they have great stabilization, they have great high shutter speed, they have decent autofocus, they have great weather sealing. I think a lot of what Micro Four Thirds will become will depend on these next two releases with the GH6 and the WOW camera that they're supposed to announce at the end of February, at least according to rumors. I don't know, I just wanted to make this video. Like I've had a lot, now that I've got this like flushed out Micro Four Thirds case, right? The 12f2, the 17f1.8, the 25f1.2, the 12 to 100, the 100 to 400, and the 30mm macro. It's a pretty decent kit with the EM10 Mark II and the EM1 Mark III with the battery grip. It's just spots it just doesn't make sense to me. But I don't know if it makes more sense to have a second kit. These are ramblings. I'm making dinner. But I wanted to share them with you. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. And oh, by the way, photo assignment, if you made it this far. Here's my photo. It sucks. I've been really busy this week. Work's been nuts, but this is what I got for weather. And next week's photo assignment is black and white. And I'll be playing around, I think, with the grainy film simulation in black and white on this EM10 Mark II as my submission for next week. And I think the photo assignment, EJ photo assignment, EJ weekly assignment, EJ photo assignment week 6. So EJ photo assignment week 6. Yeah, all right, I gotta flip these before I burn them. See ya, bye.